By now, you've probably set your New Year's resolutions for 2022. In fact, some of you may have already thrown them out the window. According to U.S. News & World Report, 80% of Americans abandon their resolutions by mid-February. While this statistic is daunting, it's important to remember that you can always start over. Think about the beginning of a new year as a time to set just one new goal. For many Americans, a common thread is money management. However, like anything else, too often people try to make extreme changes in a short period and end up falling off the bandwagon.
You have this sense of like, this year will be different. And you decide to do all of the quote unquote best practices for whatever it is that you're doing, whether that's getting your money in order or trying to lose weight. You know, you go work out for 90 minutes a day and eat nothing but kale. Or with money, you're like, all right, I'm going to track every penny and deny myself anything fun that costs money. And that's not sustainable.
That's Emily Guy Birken, a financial expert and the co-author of the book Stacked, Your Super Serious Guide to Modern Money Management. Birken says that when it comes to personal finance, people often avoid the task because they don't know where to start. Money is still a taboo topic in the U.S., and it can be confusing to go at it alone and figure out what's the right plan for you.
For instance, if you're someone who's like, oh my God, I don't want to think about my money. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to have to deal with it. That's a really important thing to know, because then you can start with like, all right, well, how can I productively ignore my money? Are there apps that will track the money for me and then send me the information and I can make decisions from there? If you're someone who is nervous about overspending and terrified always of overspending or something like that, then that gives you a place to start, because then you'll know, okay, what can I do to put in place stops that will keep me from spending too much money? So starting with that kind of money mindset, and how do I feel about money? What do I want my money to do for me? How do I want to handle my money? What works best for me? That will give you the path to take in order to find the right money management system for you.
Once you've figured out your mindset towards money, Birken says start small by laying down the fundamentals.
When you are struggling with money, you're not struggling because you don't necessarily understand cryptocurrency. You're not struggling because you are unclear on your asset allocation in your 401k. You're struggling because of the basics, things like making sure that you have your budget in order, making sure that you know where your money's going, making sure that you plan ahead for emergencies or other financial problems.
And financial budgeting looks different for everyone. Some may want to focus first on creating an emergency fund, while others hope to pay off student loan debt. But before any of this, it's important to gain money transparency. Do you know where your money is going each month? Birken says you can manage transactions the old-fashioned way of writing down each expense in a notebook or checkbook, but nowadays there are several apps out there that help automate tracking.
There are apps like Mint, which is kind of the granddaddy of these apps, but then there's also things like You Need a Budget, which is YNAB, is how it's usually marketed. And then there's also Marcus Insights is another one that what it does is it'll track your spending for you. So instead of having to carry around a notebook and pencil everywhere you go, or having to, set up your own Excel spreadsheet, these will do that for you, and then you can use that information. And that is kind of revolutionary, because tracking does not sound fun to anyone. And now it doesn't need to be difficult.
Another app that's available is called Cube, spelled Q-U-B-E. This technology takes a more proactive approach to budgeting and sets spending caps for different categories within the app.
It sets things up in what they call cubes with an attached debit card. And so if you've got $100 in your grocery cube and you end up putting $150 on the conveyor belt, even though you have more money elsewhere, the debit card will be declined with no charge. But that allows you to take advantage of that. If there's not enough money in this envelope, then that is all we can spend, without having to do all of the work of putting it into envelopes and, living in a cashless society. That doesn't really work anymore, and gives you that kind of freedom and structure that can really help you to get control of your money.
Once you have a budget in place, you can look at setting goals. Birken recommends that one way to look at the bigger picture and stay organized is to map out a life timeline. Along this horizontal line, write down short and long-term financial targets that you want to hit by a certain age or year.
Get a blank sheet of paper, you draw a little stick figure all the way on the left, and then draw a line that represents the rest of your life. And then on that line, you're going to put in the different things at different ages you want to do. You know, if you want to retire at, let's say, 58, you put that in there. If you want to pay for your kids' education. So to start with, drawing is always going to be more fun than not drawing. And then putting things on your timeline that way already gets you thinking about things much more dynamically, which is a lot more fun anyway than just saying, you know, writing down, my goal is to retire with $1 million in 10 years. So that, you know, you write that down, but you can't do much with that. But, you know, if you draw it on a timeline and then you start thinking about, you know, but I also wanted to visit Machu Picchu and I'm going to put that on the timeline. And, you know, goodness, how am I going to make that work?
Saving for a vacation or a big purchase item like a car or a house is a tangible goal that can make it easier to spend less in the moment and put money aside for the future.
If you don't have a specific goal in mind, if you're not working towards something in particular, then where is your motivation going to come from? I mean, there are some people who are like, okay, I want a big pile of money because it's going to look pretty, but that's not most people. Most people need to have something in particular that they are working towards, whether that's the vacation, their child's wedding, their child's education, what they want to do in retirement. Because even retirement is such an amorphous goal. It doesn't feel real. And so just saying, like, I need to save more money for retirement doesn't help as much as saying, I need to put money aside for retirement so that I can go back to school or so that I can travel the world.
But it's important to remember that these saving goals aren't always set in stone. Life happens sometimes, and the timeline may need to be rearranged. For instance, a lofty medical bill can pop up, and this could push the date for a vacation back by 6 months. But don't sweat it. Despite any setbacks, it's important to not lose sight of the budgeting and saving habits you've already formed. This also applies when you're in the black and making more money than before due to a raise or side hustle. With a surplus of cash on hand, it can be easy to lose sight of budgeting and fall into a hole of spending.
There's something that's known as the Hedonic Treadmill, which basically says that you get used to whatever your new standard of living is. And we have all experienced that. You know, when you first are out on your own and you're eating ramen for dinner 5 nights a week and, you know, your bookshelves are cinder blocks, you can't even imagine how luxurious it would feel to earn $100,000 per year. But as you get raises and as your standard of living changes, all of a sudden $100,000 is not nearly that much money as you thought it would be. And that's because all of the little things that you thought of as luxuries have become regular day-to-day things that are hard to give up.
Whatever end of the financial spectrum you're on, one resource that can be helpful is seeing a financial advisor. You might be thinking, I don't make enough money to enlist a professional. But Birken says it's more of a once or twice yearly investment that pays off no matter what your income is.
With financial management, there are certain things that you really need to call in an expert to help you with. And those are things like retirement planning, asset allocation in the investments that you have for future spending, for retirement, and things like that. And so a lot of people will understandably want to wait until they get to a certain level before they go to a financial advisor, but it is a good idea to be able to meet with a financial advisor and check to make sure that what you're doing is keeping you on track for what you want. So I do think that it's really important to partner with a financial advisor, and I would generally think earlier than most people think. A lot of people think, well, financial advisors are for rich people. Well, no, financial advisors are for everyone, and what's helpful is getting to a point where you feel confident with what you're doing at home, and then take that to a financial advisor to double check on.
Whatever your approach is, it's never too late to get more money savvy. Small, consistent steps can lead to big growth over time. To find out more about this topic and our guest, Emily Guy Birken, visit viewpointsradio.org. You can also check out her book, Stacked, Your Super Serious Guide to Modern Money Management, available online and in bookstores. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price. Coming up on Viewpoints.
Aging or age is the most important risk factor for almost every disease we deal with in adult medicine.
Uncovering the mysteries of aging and why some people age slower than others. Then,
every time you go into the kitchen, you're worried, like, if this doesn't turn out, it's going to be, I'm a failure. And we have these sort of mean voices in our head.
Learning to cook without the worries of failure. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.